A Shalom Akim Shalom Shalom. All praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Makakadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders who are most known for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwath. And listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Akwai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will is always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I kind of just wanted to switch things up and do something a little different. This was inspired by basically the title for the lesson is going to be, a valuable trait I admire about my father. And that trait really is somebody who is very, very studious, somebody who's very well read, right? And, really and truly, this was something I admire about, my own father, my earthly father, right? And this is something it's a sentiment that is also echoed through our apostles and elders on down, right? So, somebody who's being well read, the apostles always push a sentiment of essentially being scholarly, being essentially being studious, that sort of vibration. Because when you look at the nature of our people are very, very essentially quick to scoff, right? But always the last to know and have that understanding, right? They're very, very good at ridiculing the prophets, ridiculing our apostles and elders and so on and so forth, the men who teach on the highways and byways, giving them the understanding, right? But the quickest thing for them to do is to actually create a joke, right? To make fun of, to essentially be the people who are, they're lacking the substance, but they want to actually create a joke. So as a matter of fact, I'll start off with that precept. Actually, I didn't have that written down. That is, what's that? Sirach 21. This is Sirach chapter 21, verse 15, and it says, "If a skillful man heareth a wise word, he will commend it and add unto it. But as soon as one of no understanding heareth it, it displeaseth him and casteth behind his back," right? So it shows you that when a lot of our people hear this word, this gospel, them being the so-called, not so-called, but I should say the Israelites according to the Bible, we were the people, that were with Moses and Aaron. We were the people who got sold into slavery, and the Lord punished us, and the Lord put curses upon us. When they hear these things, their mind frame is like, they don't really care, and for those who do care, it's a very, very small few that actually care about their heritage. When it comes to their own history, it doesn't, it's something that is far from their imagination. It's from even from what I've experienced so far. You meet very, very few people who actually care about their own history and their own what's it called, their own heritage, where they come from. I want to actually inquire to know more, right? There was a point I was going to make. That's what the scriptures say, that if our gospel be hid, it is hid to them that are lost, right? So, and then a lot of our people are in that that mindset of gross darkness. They're, because it doesn't, it displeases them. They don't care, right? But going really back to the title of the lesson, really is a trait I admire about my earthly father, really, is somebody who is studious, someone who is someone who's well read. He always believed in actually trying to acquire knowledge. Of course, he doesn't have the knowledge of the scriptures. But that sentiment is the same, and because that is the sentiment our apostles and elders also push as well, right? So I want to read this here in Surah the 38th chapter, verse 24, and it says, "And wisdom of a learned man," it says, "cometh by opportunity of leisure, and he that hath little business shall become wise." Right. So let me get that word, leisure, in the etymology here. Just bear with me. Let me just look for it. Leisure. Hold on. That's him online. Okay, so leisure, in the etymology, it says free time. It says time at one's disposal, opportunity to do something, chance, occasion. It says, excuse me, from the French "loisir" or "loisir," meaning capacity, ability, freedom to do something, permission, spare time, inactivity, be permitted. So this is something, we what's it say? Opportunity afforded by freedom from necessary occupations, right? So, we have our, our jobs, right? But part of what we do in our leisure is to actually get into understanding the Holy Scriptures, right? So we can have a closer, relationship with Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, right? And understanding, the stories, understanding the prophecies, understanding, how to actually cultivate a healthy relationship with the Lord, so the Lord can remember us, in times of trouble, right? The scriptures say, "Draw near to the Most High." Right. As a matter of fact, let me get that next, actually. Right, because that's part of our leisure, right? Where is that? I think that's James, the 4th chapter. Okay, the verse 8, and it says, "Draw near to the Most High Yahweh, and he will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts. Be ye double-minded. Be afflicted, and mourn and weep. And let your laughter be turned into mourning, and your joy into heaviness," right? So, we draw near, through the Most High, through his Son, Yahweh Shai, and understanding that the book, the book is written of him, because, that's, we get an understanding of the ways of our forefathers, and that's I guess part of being studious too, because we learn of Yahweh Shai basically, right? So but the thing that I strongly, going back really to the point of the lesson, is the fact that my father was somebody who was very, very well studious, and he grew up in a time where Jake was pretty much being ridiculed. And I remember one time we were having this conversation, and he told me this joke. Well, it wasn't a joke, but it was like one of those, like those I guess so-called like racist jokes. He used to say, back in his time, he used to say, "How do you hide money from a black man? You put it in a book," right? So he, when he used to hear these things, his mindset was to actually try and like understand and educate himself, kind of like how we educate ourselves, understanding and knowing the scriptures, knowing the prophecies, breakdowns, knowing, the law, knowing our own history, knowing how things were, in the ancient times, right? Knowing how to be good judges, knowing morals and etiquette. Like there's so much, the scriptures cover so much, right? That's what the scriptures say, "Seek ye the book of the Lord and read, and none shall want her mate," to roughly paraphrase, right? He believed in that mindset of being, as a matter of fact, let me get that word also, studious. Because when you think about, the nature of our people, when they know, speaking of like the young generation especially, our people, they know about how many points, LeBron James scored in, the last game between Cleveland and the Nets. I'm just using that as an example, right? But when it comes to knowing their own history, how they came over here, why they're being put in this position, knowing their own heritage, it's these are matters of concern that it doesn't concern them, right? They're more concerned about, whether it's acquiring, physical status, physical wealth. They're more concerned with, pretty much things that are the cares of this world, so to speak. They don't actually care about, understanding why they're in the position that they're in. You know, that's why our people are strongly destroyed for lack of knowledge, right? So, let me get that word studious because I keep bringing that up. Because that's something, he strongly, believed in, right? So this is the word studious. In the etymology, it says someone who is zealous, diligent, eager, eager to learn, devoted to learn, seeking knowledge from books, right? It says devoted to study, assiduous, zealous, right? Let me get that word as assiduous also. I believe that goes to also diligence as well. Let's define that. Okay. It says diligent, careful, meticulous, thorough, attentive, right? As a matter of fact, let me get this precept. It just came to my mind. What's that? Proverbs 15. No, that's not it. How does it go? Righteous man. Answer. Let me just find it. Can't find it. Just bear with me on this. Let me just look for this. Righteous man. Okay, found it. All praises. This is Proverbs 15, verse 28. And it says, the heart of the righteous studieth to answer, but the mouth of the wicked poureth out evil things, right? So when you listen to our people, when they pour out these different evil things about, how the Lord loves everybody, he came to save everybody and all this kind of stuff. These are the things that it shows you, our people are not, very well studied, right? That's why the apostles always have a strong disdain for so-called black Christians, because they don't actually go into the records and actually go into the history. Our apostles even push that vibration also, to understand the mystery is to know the history, to roughly paraphrase what they say, right? So that it shows us that sentiment vibration of them being diligent and assiduous, right, to them being very, very meticulous, right? And they also push that vibration of also going into the meaning of words, breaking them down, right? That shows somebody who's very, very well studied, explaining the different origins of certain words, and actually, okay, there's prefixes and there's suffixes, and knowing the Hebrew, knowing the Greek, knowing the Latin, because it pretty much, going back to the first precept I brought out, it's a labor, right? The scriptures also talk about how to go into understanding the ways of the ant, because the ant is an animal, an insect, I should say, that is very, very, diligent in that same sentiment. Because when you think about this word, it's also likened unto a labor as well. You know, it's a labor of love, right? But, it's also a labor, for brothers who have done, different particular laborious tasks, like when I first came into the truth, it was, I used to work as a gardener, right? And one of the things, like if you worked with those kind of outside in the elements, you realize that it's a labor to like move, yard work, being I gotta move stones, you gotta move soil, it's a labor, it's a toll on your body, right? Just like just like going into these things, it's a toll on your physical body, right? But the inward man is constantly being renewed, right? But that's just one of the things I kind of just wanted to go into, because when you think about the nature of our people, they're wise to do evil, but to do good they have no knowledge, right? This is why they're so um simple. They are easily taken by especially the other groups that are very dressed very well. They're very ignorant to certain things, right? And not knowing who they are, they can't really defend against the fiery darts of Esau, basically, and the methods that come against them from like other nations and so on and so forth, because they have no covering, they have no foundation, they have no what's it called, they have no protection, right? They're pretty much just vulnerable. So this is why the other nations kind of like come upon them and prey upon them, right? Because they essentially left their habitation, they left off the ways of knowing and being intimate with Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, right? And something also I was thinking about in regards to somebody who is studious. This is the character and the vibration of a ruler, of a king, right? Because when you think about the king, a king, kings were very, very knowledgeable. They knew about things. If you ask Jake about certain things, today, where's the what does ask them about something as simple as where does the for example, where does democracy come from? Jake can't tell you. They can tell you about how many Kardashian sisters there are. They can probably tell you about all the different shoes LeBron has or Kevin Durant has. They can tell you these things, but to tell you about certain artifacts in history, or to tell you things about what's going on, why is there a continuing what's it called, war, calamity going on in the Holy Land, they can't tell you that. And Jake is they're more wrapped up into the bread and circus vibration, right? So since I made that point, this is one of my let me just get this here. What's that? First Kings. Okay, this is First Kings 4, verse 32. Excuse me, and it says, and he spake, speaking of Solomon, I'll start at verse 29 actually, and it says, and the Most High Yahweh gave Solomon wisdom and understanding, exceeding much in largeness of heart, even as the sand that is on the seashore. And Solomon excelled excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country, and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman and Chakal, and daughter of the sons of Maol, and his fame was in all nations round about. And he spake 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. Here's pretty much the point, somebody who's been, understood different things. And it says, verse 33, it says, and he spake of the trees, and from the cedar tree that is in Lebanon, and even unto the hyssop that springeth forth out of the wall. He spake also of the beasts, and of the fowl, and of the creeping things, and of the fishes, right? And that's the same sentiment, that the men of the Lord, they come in that same vibration when you think about it, because the scriptures say that we have an unction, and an unction basically goes into an anointing, right? And anointing was such a very interesting process when it came to different kings, because they would have the oil being poured on them, right? So going into that divine inspiration, right? Where they essentially they got more understanding, so to speak, and it was more of a process, a very interesting process, from them becoming from who they were to them being a king, right? And when you think about it, in our sense, we have an unction or an anointing, from the Holy One to know all these things, right? So there's things that, you might have conversations with people, and, that you can go into, different facets of different areas, right? You're not just limited to one track and one, I don't want to say a discipline, but one expertise, right? So you can speak about, whether it's the herbs in the field. You can speak about the geopolitics that's going on in the Holy Land, because all that's prophecy, right? Because the Bible can, it deals with prophecy. The scriptures deal with prophecy. The scriptures deal with herbs. The scriptures teach you how to deal with people. The scriptures teach you how to deal with, how to, different types of fabric, right? The scriptures deal with all these different facets, on all these different things, right? You got the history, right? So, that it makes you a more well-rounded type of character. That is a mindset. That's a vibration of a king. Scriptures say that it is the glory of the Lord to conceal a thing. As a matter of fact, let me get it, because I don't want to mess it up. I guess I'll end off with that one. Right, and it says Proverbs 25 verse 2. I'll read it in the AMP, and it says, it is the glory of Yahweh Bashem Yahushai to conceal a matter, but the glory of kings is to search out a matter, right? So it's we search these things out, right? So going back into the sentiment of a laborer, and somebody who's studious, right? So that's pretty much it. I didn't want to make the lesson too long, but I sincerely pray and hope this was edifying. I didn't want to make the lesson too, I guess personal, but I just thought that I would just share that, because it shows you the contrast, between, a lot of our people, because our people have been in Babylon too long, being programmed by Babylon's, a nonsensical vibration, right? So anyways, Lord's will, this was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. Until next time, I say Shalom.